And how many times in life do we have to get 2 miles down the muddy road before we realize we need to let that stuff go? And so this idea of learning how to recognize these imbalances and having the tools and the strategies to be able to do that is extremely powerful.
What's the most efficient path to victory against this particular opponent?
He's dropping off for the choke here. We could see the finish. It's looking tight. Tight at Alpra.
Hey guys, welcome to the Everyday Jiu-Jitsu Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Kwan. The Everyday Jiu-Jitsu Podcast is everything you need to know about Jiu-Jitsu. Today I have with me Mr. Jeff Patterson. Welcome to the show,
Hey,
Jeff.
how you doing? Hey, thanks for having me.
Great. Guys, if you want to support the show, check out the links in the bottom. So Jeff, who are you?
Well, I've been running a martial arts academy here in Portland, Oregon since 1994. We have 4 programs here. We have our Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu program, our striking program, which is boxing and Muay Thai. We have our Eskrima JKD program, and then our meditation program where we do Tai Chi and Qigong and various different forms of meditation.
So Eskrima, that's like Kali, right? Like stick fighting. Filipino martial art, is that correct?
Yeah, Kali, Eskrima, Arnis, Filipino stick and knife fighting. It also has the empty hand fighting and their form of grappling, which is the Dumog, the Panantukan, which is their form of the Filipino boxing, and the Sikaran, which is a Filipino kicking art.
You're a 4th degree BJJ black belt, is that true?
Yes.
How does the Kali style of grappling differ from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu?
It's a lot different. So Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is, a lot more hands-on. You're on the floor. It's a lot more freestyle, a lot more resistance training. Whereas in the Kali, there's a lot of like small joint manipulation, like things you teach police officers to, like how to get somebody in handcuffs, wrist locks, arm locks, standing lock flows, and that kind of thing, leading to the ground. But once you get to the ground, it's kind of like more of like flow drill kind of training, which is one of the things that really brought me to the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and made me so passionate about it, is playing that resistance element and adding that into it. It just adds a whole nother dimension. And so I think that's the kind of one of the biggest differences there.
Why did you get into Jiu-Jitsu? And I guess, all martial arts, given the, your vast martial arts background, how'd you get into the martial arts?
Yeah, well, as a young guy, I was very much into Western boxing. And, I used to go to a boxing gym just a few blocks down the street here from my academy called a Grand Avenue Boxing Gym. And, I'm sure you're probably familiar, but for your listeners that may not be, at a boxing gym, it's not run like your traditional fitness class where you go in and there's an instructor and, I have a group of students following them. Usually there's, 4 or 5 different coaches running around the gym, and each one of those coaches might have 3, 4, or 5 different fighters they're working with. Well, at this one particular gym, one of the coaches there was a very well-known coach. He had worked with champions in the professional level as well as the amateur level. And I really wanted to get to spend some time with him. So I would always show up at the gym when I knew he was going to be there and try to get him to notice me and work hard and just try to make that connection. And after following him around for about 3 or 4 months, he finally started giving me some attention and kind of pointing me in the direction, helping me out with a few things. And it was only about maybe 2 or 3 weeks of working with him when he said something to me that changed my life forever. And he said, if you really want to be a good boxer, you should start doing meditation and Tai Chi. Now, at the time, I'm this 19-year-old kid thinking, isn't Tai Chi for old people in the park? How's that going to help me be a better fighter? And I had a lot of respect for him, though. I followed his advice. I started doing a meditation practice, and it changed my life in so many ways through the years. And, I've been very fortunate here at my academy to have over 26,000 members come through the school in the last 30 years. And I've seen the meditative arts positively influence, hundreds of people's lives. But by him doing that and leading me in that direction to explore other avenues, that's when I started getting into the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and started branching off and getting into some of the Eskrima and the Filipino martial arts, and really just kind of making a life practice out of the martial arts.
So for you, is Tai Chi and meditation, is it kind of one thing, or are those two separate things for you, especially when you
Yeah.
advocate for meditation?
When I talk about the meditative arts, I'm encompassing a bunch of different things. So in a meditation practice, you have 5 different directions that you can take the practice. There is the physical side of the practice that helps your performance and your mind-body connection and your awareness and your timing and all of those elements that help you be a better performer. Then there's the therapeutic side of the practice that helps you to be more in tune with the body and work through injuries and helps with longevity. Then there's the medical side of the practice, and all of Chinese medicine is based off of Qigong theory, which is a meditative art. And then there's the philosophical side and also the spiritual side. And so as somebody new is coming to a meditation practice, they would want to see kind of what path they want to follow. And then they would integrate different practices through movement practices, still practices, philosophical practices, to help them create that evolving life practice with the meditative arts.
So how does meditation help you? I guess this is kind of a big question, but in martial arts and also in other aspects of life, like just daily wellness, business, interacting with other people. Can you kind of give us an overview of that?
Yeah, in so many ways, and these days it's nice because when I first started practicing meditation over 36 years ago, most people, they hear meditation back then, it was like, oh, that's kind of some new age thing that, how's that going to help you with anything? But now you look out and you'll see professional athletes everywhere that are turning to the meditative arts because they truly see the value. In fact, Phil Jackson, when he was coaching the Chicago Bulls, when Michael Jordan was on the team, and also when he was coaching the LA Lakers, he would have his athletes practicing meditation and Tai Chi because it improved their focus and performance. And, here you have the best athletes on the planet in basketball practicing this stuff. And so it really has some kind of social proof these days. And it really has a lot of scientific studies that have been done to show that it really does improve your performance. From an athletic standpoint, it helps with understanding root and having a stronger foundation. It helps with being able to be more in tune and aware of how the energetic transfers in the body and how you can move more efficiently with the least amount of effort. And if you're familiar with jiu-jitsu, any of your listeners out there that are doing this, how many times do you see the white belt out there? They'll go and they'll roll for 5 minutes and they feel like, they're ready to throw up. And it's, that idea of not learning how to relax and pay attention and focus your energy. And, if you've ever been fortunate enough to play with some really high level jiu-jitsu players, I always think of Master Sauer when I think about this. Here's this small guy who is just so technical and able to just listen to everything that's going on. It improves those listening skills and that ability to make these adjustments with the least amount of resistance. And this kind of opens up like the idea of yielding, which is one of the philosophical concepts in the meditative and martial arts that I've been very passionate about. In fact, my last book, called The Yielding Warrior, is all about understanding how to integrate yielding into every area of your life. We have physical yielding, mental yielding, and emotional yielding. Physical yielding is the idea that I push you, you push me, whoever's the bigger, stronger person with the most leverage eventually is going to push the other person over. But with yielding, instead of us trying to see who the bigger meathead is, when you push me, I get out of the way of that force. And now I can respond with less effort. So I'm not trying to butt heads with you and see if I'm bigger and stronger than you. And, in athletics, it's obvious how this is beneficial because oftentimes you're going to come up against opponents that are bigger and stronger and faster than you. And so you have to understand how to use this idea. Now, in order to be good at physical yielding, a lot of things have to come into play. You need to be well rooted. The lower part of your body needs to be strong and flexible so you can change your central equilibrium without getting tight. The body has to be relaxed. The mind has to be present and the breath has to be calm. Now, in order for all of these things to happen, it's a lifetime journey to really master these skills. However, from day one, by integrating a meditation practice into your life, you start seeing these things more clearly inside yourself. And here's where it starts to become very interesting, because not only do you see these things more clearly inside yourself, but you also start to see them more clearly in other people. And now we're moving into what I call mental yielding. So say, for example, you and I are having a conversation and I say something that unsettles you, and I pick up on it right from that first sign of imbalance. It's a lot easier to adjust the conversation and keep us in a harmonious place than if I'm not paying attention to that. Pretty soon I'm so far off track, you want to slap me upside the head. And so learning how to use yielding in all of your interactions is extremely powerful. One, you're being more considerate, which is something that we could all do more of. And two, it allows you to be strategic in your interactions and guide conversations to a positive outcome with the least amount of resistance. And this is great for relationships, for business, for sales, for negotiations. I mean, there's so many different ways that we can apply this concept. And then the third pillar of yielding is emotional yielding. And emotional yielding is very much like mental yielding, but with our own interpersonal conflicts. So you think about, oftentimes something will happen to us and we'll respond and we'll go down this path. And we might get an hour, a day, a week down that road and realize maybe that wasn't the best choice. But with yielding, if we could have taken a step back and been more present, not let our emotions get control of our decision making, we could often make a more clear, educated decision that's going to save us a lot of heartache on the other side. And I've been explaining this idea of yielding for many years. I've been running my academy now for 30 years. And one of the most common things I'll hear people say is, yielding makes a lot of sense. In fact, I do that all the time. Well, I would agree in that I think everybody does some degree of yielding all the time. But it's kind of like, if you or I were to walk into a crime scene with a detective who's been on the job for 30 years, I guarantee you that person would see things about the series of events and the timeline that I know at least I would have no clue of. And the meditative arts helps us see things inside of ourselves and inside of other people that I truly believe that you will never have any clue of without this kind of a practice in your life.
So I've heard of, obviously, meditation, but I've never heard of the term yielding. And would you say, is it accurate to say, just from how I've heard you describe what yielding is it just finding the path of least resistance in anything you do? Like, is that kind of what yielding is?
That describes a piece of it, yes. But it's also a little deeper than that, because by integrating these practices into your life, you reach a deeper level of awareness and vision. A lot of times we're all guilty of this. Nobody doesn't do it. We walk through life and we think about things with this kind of tunnel vision. Well, when you start doing a meditation practice, it helps open up your vision, and you start seeing, using your peripheral vision in your mind more, and start to see things from multiple different angles. So now not only are you able to follow the path of least resistance, but you're able to strategically see it from different perspectives. So you don't get caught up approaching it from a linear approach that doesn't give you as many options. And so it's really powerful in that sense, and that it makes you more strategic in your own personal communication, your communication with others, and your ability to express yourself physically as well.
So I've practiced like visualization and breath work, and I have done a little bit of meditation, but like it's not part of my daily practice. It's not ingrained in my routine yet. How would you recommend somebody like me, who's like a beginner at that? How would we, begin to start to incorporate meditation into our daily lives?
So I want to talk about a couple things with that. So the first thing is understanding the basic layout of a meditation practice and creating this in your life. And that is, we want to have a ritual practice that we do every day. And it's important to have this kind of foundation, because it's where we're planting the seeds, where we're going to start to see all the benefits from our time. And in a ritual practice, if you could just do 20 minutes a day, you don't need to retire to a cave and meditate for the rest of your life. But if you could just be consistent with that and do that that daily ritual, whether it's a sitting practice, a standing meditation, a Tai Chi form, a Qigong set, whatever that is for you, and be consistently doing that. And then combine that with what we call active practices. And active practices are things that you can do when you're walking down the street or standing in line at the grocery store. And they could be simple things as a breathing exercise or some spinal rotations or a simple movement practice. And they're a way for us to bring our awareness into the present moment and stay connected to this kind of way of life, if you will, rather than just being where you meditate every morning and you feel good for a while and the whole rest of the day you're stressed out, distracted, and off center. So this is a way for us to help start to live the practice rather than having it be a hobby. And then the third pillar of a practice is the philosophical side of the practice. And this is where we work with different sounds or mantras or sayings. You know, one of my old meditation teachers, he had me memorize the Tao Te Ching. And if you're familiar with that, it's a book of 81 sayings that teaches the mind how to see life from different perspectives and apply virtue into everything we do. And so when you combine those three things, your ritual, your active practice, and your philosophical practices, now we have the basic plan for building a practice in our life. Now, for somebody new coming to the practice, you know, as far as being a teacher, one of the most difficult things that I come up against is getting people to see the value in having a consistent practice and following through with that so they can make it part of their life and really reap the many benefits that come by integrating meditation into their life. And so through the years, I've come up with different things that I've tested and tried to help people make that realization so they can really see the value in it. And what I found is that I have three questions that I always ask people, or things that I like them to consider and put some time into when they're thinking about taking on the practice. And the first one is, and it's something any athlete already knows about, is why are you in this practice? What do you want to stay healthy into your old age to watch your grandkids grow up? Or are you dealing with anxiety and depression and panic attacks and you want a way to be more settled and in control of your life? Or maybe you're an athlete and you want to improve your performance on the field. And once you have that, not only why do you want to do that, but think about all the ways that's going to positively affect you and really put some time considering that. And then also flip the coin and think about all of the ways that it's going to negatively affect you if you don't do that. And if you have that and you really have some values set in there and you've spent some time thinking about that, that gives you the fuel to stay consistent, which is the next thing you want to consider. You know, the Dalai Lama once said that everybody should meditate for 20 minutes a day. Unless you're too busy, then you should meditate for an hour. And I really resonate with that because I find that it's so valuable to have that consistency. And through that consistency, we gain this discipline, this integrity, this perseverance that not only affects us in our daily practice, but it also bleeds over into every area of your life. And then the third thing is, you've got to find a guide. You've got to have somebody to help navigate through this stuff. You know, I've been studying the meditative arts now for 36 years, and it's a deep practice. It's something where, you know, even after 36 years and this being my profession, I'm still learning every day. And if you think that you're going to go out there on YouTube and look at one of the million videos out there and figure out how to meditate on your own, you're going to waste a lot of time. And I've literally had students come into the academy that have been doing a self-taught practice for 15, even 20 years, and they're barely past a beginning stage of practice, you know, and our time is valuable. Our lives are short, you know, find somebody to help kind of point you in the direction. Now, if you do those three considerations, think about your why, figure out the importance of consistency, find yourself a guide, have a ritual practice, active practice, and philosophical practices. That's the foundation for really creating a solid meditative practice.
What is your daily ritual?
Every morning I
look
have
like?
about an hour and a half ritual that I personally do. And then throughout the day, I have active practices that I do at least every hour, if not more. At this point, it's kind of like a way of life for me. I haven't missed my ritual practice since I had my hip surgery over 5 years ago. It's just part of my lifestyle. It's part of what I do. And in my rituals and my active practices, I do things from sitting meditations to movement meditation, standing meditation, breath work, energy circulations in the body. I mean, there's so many different things that I integrate into the practice at this point. And so it's one of the things, that for those of you that are kind of new to the practice to think about is that, this is such a deep practice that, you could start studying now for the rest of your life. And there's always new angles and ways to kind of see things. And that's one of the things that makes me so passionate about it, is that it's, you're always learning, you're always the student.
And so, okay, so you had mentioned that meditation has helped injuries heal faster earlier in the podcast, and you experienced did you say a hip replacement or a hip surgery?
I had a torn labrum, so I had a hip surgery, yes.
Okay, so would you say that meditation helped you recover faster? And if so, how does that work?
So meditation has helped me recover faster from many injuries, and being in the martial arts for 36 years, I've experienced my fair share. The idea is that you become more in tune with the body, and everybody has a general awareness of the body. And so when you tell people this, they think, yeah, I get it, but it's like they get it at their level of education. There's a big difference. I always tell people to think about, say you've got a group of fairly disciplined athletes. It's easy if they have a good coach to get them to 85% of their potential, but to get them to 90, to 95%, to 97%, you're talking about, like the Michael Jordans and the Kobe Bryants out there, the rare few people out there that ever reach that level. The meditative arts helps us see those last few percents. They helps us become more in tune. And that's why all these professional high-level athletes are turning to the meditative arts, because they help us see those energetic connections in the body, and that awareness and that ability that improves our timing and our options for using our energetic expression in the body, which is essential for recovering from injuries. Because so often we'll have an injury and we don't listen to our bodies very well, and we end up hurting it again and getting to the point where, we're taking what should have been a 6-week recovery into a 3 or 4 month recovery. And that ability to be able to listen and be sensitive and aware of that and present with that more, that's one way it'll help. The other way that it helps is by generating more energy in the body and building up the energy reserves in what we call our dantian. We can use that energy circulation in the body and lead it to these points of energy to help improve the blood flow and the energetic circulation in that area, to help improve the healing process. And so there's multiple different ways that it can help with that.
You had mentioned that there's scientific studies for this stuff. Is what you're referring to right now backed by scientific studies?
Oh, there's so many. I mean, you could literally do a search on Google and just say something like, show me the scientific studies that prove meditation is beneficial. And I bet you'd come up with thousands of hits. I have seen, here's an example. I was reading an article from the Harvard Medical School about how they took these patients who were demonstrating signs of early onset Alzheimer's disease and memory loss, and they were having a lot of difficulties, pulling things up from short and long-term memory. And so what they did is they taught this group of patients deep breathing techniques, and they put them into oxygen chambers. And after a very short time, all of them, the whole group as a whole, improved their memory up to 30% on average for the whole group. And now, it doesn't get too much more reputable than Harvard Medical School, and this is written literature in scientific journals. And so this is just one of the thousands of examples out there of how, people are studying this stuff now to show that, hey, this is legit. There's a reason why people have been doing this for thousands of years. Maybe back then they couldn't really explain it as well as we do now, but now, because there's so much science out there that's backing this stuff, it's really pretty interesting. Another thing that I always show people when they come into the academy, I have this picture. They call it the Taoist internal alchemy, and it's a picture that they created 1400 years ago about energetic circulations in the body. And, back then there was no scientific evidence to show that, how would they even map this stuff out or feel that? And now, because we can attach things to our body and pay attention to how the energy is traveling in the body, we can map out the energetic circulations in the body fairly clearly. And they match what they were going through and sensing and feeling 1400 years ago to a T. And so it's really kind of cool. Everybody talks about, you do meditation for the mind-body connection. It's one thing to say that, but what does that really mean? And how do we prove that? Well, that right there is, living proof that it actually does that.
Can you direct us to a scientific study that demonstrates what you're claiming?
The one right there, I just told you about, that Harvard Medical School study. You can check that out.
Okay. So for beginners, and I'll include myself in this category. Would you, where would you recommend people get started? Something that we can do at home, before we seek out professional help, something that we could just do, in 20 minutes. What would you recommend as a basic practice?
Something simple that you could do to get started is just set an alarm on your phone to go off every 60 or 90 minutes. And every time it goes off, stop whatever you're doing, shut off the screens, and just count out 10 deep belly breaths and use that. We call that a reset practice. And it'll help just bring you back into the present moment, and then go about your day. And you do that every day for a couple months, and you'll see some really good changes from that. And that's a simple practice that everybody can do that doesn't take more than 90 seconds, maybe 2 minutes at the most. And it's a way that you can start integrating that present state of mind and improving your awareness. And that's a very powerful practice. As far as ritual practices, those are very detailed, and depending on what it is you're trying to get out of the practice, which is why it's so important to have a guide, because you might be wanting to come into the meditative arts for the spiritual side of the training. Somebody else might want to be coming in to improve their athletic performance. I wouldn't have them necessarily doing all the same practices, and having a guide will help you understand how to navigate that and to find the shortest path to get the outcome that you want from the training.
How related and intertwined is breathing when it comes to meditative practices?
Oh, it's essential. In the meditative arts, we have what we call the 5 regulations: regulating the body, regulating the breath, regulating the mind, regulating the energy, and regulating the spirit. And briefly, I'll touch on all 5 of those, and I'll answer your question when we get to the breath regulation. So regulating the body is where we usually start, and it's the easiest one to understand. And it's, an example of that would be, maybe think about a time where you're sitting down at your computer and you've been there 3 or 4 hours and your shoulders are rounded forward and you start feeling lethargic and depleted a little bit. Your energy level's low. Maybe your neck's getting sore. And then think about another time when the most important person in your world walks in the room and your body perks up and you feel like you're on top of the world. Well, these 2 different energetic states we're in 100% control of all day, every day. And so recognizing how to pay attention to our skeletal alignment and our muscular tension in the body is an extremely important part of this in all of our day-to-day and physical activities. Now, this is kind of like the basic level of regulating the body. The next level is maintaining some sort of muscular ability in the body, some flexibility, eating a healthy diet so we have the proper energy in the body, and getting enough sleep. These would all be included in that body regulation. Then we have regulating the breath. And regulating the breath is an extremely deep topic. And, oftentimes they refer to Qigong as the science of the breath, because there's literally hundreds of different breathing strategies. Now, when we have so many different strategies, we kind of try to figure out, What's the science behind it? How do we use the breath to get these different outcomes? And so we broadly categorize them into yin methods and yang methods. Yin methods are often deeper, more holistic style of breathing meditations. An example of a yin breath would be if you ever listen to somebody sleep, their natural breathing pattern is a longer inhale and a shorter exhale. And this is the body's natural way of bringing your conscious mind into your subconscious mind, which is where we are when we're sleeping and dreaming. And so if we can emulate this style of energetic expression in our meditations and do longer inhales, maybe soft retentions at the end of the inhale, we can lead that energy inward, which is great for stress reduction, dealing with anxiety and panic attacks, improving our creativity. I mean, there's so many different things that we could do with this side of the breath. Then we have the yang side of the breath, which is more aggressive. And an example of that would be if you've ever had to push your car or you pick up something heavy, your natural instinct is to exhale and put tension in the breath, maybe even make the breath audible. And this helps generate energy and power. Now, once we understand how to use the breath strategically, we can adjust our physical, mental, and emotional states throughout the day. And in Chinese philosophy, they call this balancing the kan and li, or the water and fire. And we all do this. We go through the day with emotional ups and downs. Some people are maybe a little more balanced, others maybe more like a roller coaster. But when you start to understand these imbalances and see this, because we've improved our awareness and we're more sensitive to recognizing these things, when we see ourselves starting to get excited, we can use the yin side of the breath to help bring that back down. And when we see ourselves starting to feel depleted, we can use the yang side of the breath to help pick us back up. And so understanding the strategy of the breath is essential in any meditation practice. Now, the third regulation is regulating the mind. And regulating the mind is a very deep topic, and it's something that you'll study for the rest of your life. And the basic idea of this is, through the years, I've heard so many people come to me and say, I tried meditation, but it just didn't work for me. I couldn't quiet my mind. And somewhere along the way, people got this misguided idea that in order to be good at meditation, you have to reach this state of nirvana and be in a place where nothing can penetrate you, And so this is very misguided. And the idea of meditation is that, say you're doing a sitting practice or a movement practice like Tai Chi or Qigong or whatever it is, and you're 20 minutes into the practice and you've been distracted 50 times. This is great because every time you get distracted, you recognize the distraction, you bring yourself back to center with your breath, your posture, your movement, and you're able to start noticing these imbalances and finding that center. And if you do this every day, every month, every year, you start to develop this resiliency and this ability to be almost unshakable, if you will, where nothing can penetrate that, and you can always find a way to approach things from a more balanced state. There's this story that I really enjoy about these two old monks, and they're walking down this dirt road after a huge rainstorm, and everything's muddy. There's puddles everywhere. And they come up to this road where there's a huge puddle in the road, and on the other side of the road is this beautiful little girl, and she's standing there in a white dress, and she's crying. And the older monk, he yells across the puddle and says, "Is everything okay? Can we help you?" And she says, "I need to be somewhere, but if I walk across this puddle, I'm going to get my dress all dirty." So he rolls up his pant legs and walks across the puddle, picks her up, puts her on his back, takes her to the other side, and she's off on her way. Well, him and the younger monk are walking a couple miles down the road, and finally, the younger monk is just furious, and he says, we're not supposed to touch girls, but you did back there at the puddle." And the older monk looks down and says, "You're still thinking about that girl? I left her back there at the puddle." And how many times in life do we have to get 2 miles down the muddy road before we realize we need to let that stuff go? And so this idea of learning how to recognize these imbalances and having the tools and the strategies to be able to do that is extremely powerful. And then the fourth regulation is regulating the energy. And regulating the energy is a very deep topic and something that we could literally talk for hours about. But just briefly to give you an idea with this is that Once we've reached a competent level in regulating the body, the breath, and the mind, we now have the tools to circulate the energy in the body, to lead it inwards, to extend it outwards, to get different energetic expressions, whether they're physical, mental, or emotional. And so this is a very powerful part of our meditation journey. And then lastly, we have the spiritual side of the practice, which, many meditation practitioners and monks and Qigong masters that have been doing this as a lifelong journey are working towards that ultimate stage of enlightenment. But when you understand these 5 regulations and see that they're the core foundation of any meditation practice, now you can see that this can affect everything you do in life and can make everything better.
So if you were going to be working with like a high level athlete whose purpose for meditation is to improve their athletic performance, whatever sport that may be, like how would you approach that differently from somebody else, just an average person who's not athletic? What would be your process in developing a protocol to help that athlete?
One of the reasons why I really love working with athletes is there's so much more discipline than the average person. They've already got the focus. They already understand the value of being consistent and doing stuff. So a lot of, when I have somebody new come in that's not an athlete, a lot of them is trying to get them to understand those kinds of things. With an athlete, we already understand that. So now it's just convincing them, if they already aren't, that there is social evidence that, hey, this is going to help you. Now we just got to put the energy forth and make it happen. Once we're past that point, then we would talk about, okay, what areas do we need help with? What practices do we want to work with to help that athlete for ritual practices, for active practices, and then philosophical practices? And then we would start building that evolving practice, and with a meditation journey like this, they would start, say this month with whatever they're doing. In 3 months, 6 months, a year down the road, at each point, we're going to be evolving and changing and adjusting things to improve where they are, because a lot of these practices with the meditative arts need to be taught sequentially, because we need to have the experience of the feeling of these stages as we go through the practice. And if you don't experience the feeling, I could teach you 100 different practices today, but you'd walk away from the day and you'd still be a beginner. But if I just taught you one and you experience the feeling of that practice and you really got it to a deep level, now you're reaping the benefits from that. And, unfortunately, in today's society, with everybody has this fast food kind of attitude, and they want it now, and they want this and that and the other, they don't take time to really get to the root of things. And as a jiu-jitsu practitioner yourself, and how long have you been doing jiu-jitsu?
So I've been training for about 16
Awesome.
years now.
You know very well that with jiu-jitsu, think about if you only tried doing the shoulder stack pass from guard 10 times, how good you'd be. You'd be horrible. How many thousands of repetitions have you put in doing that pass? And building that foundation and that feeling and that sensitivity and that spatial awareness of that movement and how you get through that is what's made you so successful in your practice. And the meditative arts is the same way. There's things that, in order for you to do a combination in jiu-jitsu where you're linking 4 movements together, you got to have each movement solid first. And the meditative arts is no different. So, with an athlete, we would pick things that kind of find out where they're at physically, mentally, emotionally, and what things that they need to learn. And then we would start building on that from there and stacking things and teaching them how to put things together to enhance their awareness, their sensitivity, their ability to move, and their energetic expression physically, mentally, and emotionally, and start building that evolving practice.
So you had mentioned at the beginning of the conversation that you're getting involved with martial arts, and then your instructor, it was sort of, if I remember correctly, your boxing instructor was mentioning about how meditation was so important, and kind of got you on the path towards the meditative arts. Am I correct? So at what point did you realize the benefits of it? Was it right away? Was it after a couple of months of practice? Did it take years? When did you know you were like, okay, I'm on to something. I know this is going to be significant in my life?
I was a dumb 19-year-old kid. I didn't know much of anything when I started doing the meditative arts. And so, I just had a lot of trust in this coach. I knew he was trying to help me. Everything he used to give me back then, I treated like it was gold. I really wanted to impress him. I was out there to work hard. I wanted to show him that I was disciplined and that I wasn't wasting his time. And so when he first started showing me a few things, he asked me to do a half an hour a day of a sitting meditation and a half an hour a day of some Tai Chi movements. And so everything he gave me, I did a little extra. So I was doing an hour and a half every day of these few movements that he showed me and the sitting practice. Well, I got 4 months into the practice, doing every day like I brushed my teeth. I hadn't missed a day. I was very disciplined as a young guy. I still am. And I got to the point where I started thinking, man, is this guy ever going to show me anything? Why am I doing these same few movements? Why am I doing this? I didn't get it. It wasn't sinking in. And I'm sure he could see that frustration because I was still going to the boxing gym 5-6 days a week and working on my boxing there with him. And every time he'd ask me how my meditation was going, I'd tell him good, but I'm sure he could hear the tone of my voice. And, it wasn't until about maybe the 6-7 month mark where I went down into my basement one morning to do my ritual practice. And I looked up at the clock and an hour and a half had gone by and it felt like 15 minutes. And I had this feeling of euphoria in my body where I don't know what just happened, but I wanted that to happen again. I mean, it was almost magical, and from that point on, my whole perspective of the practice changed. And that's where I dove in and I really started becoming a disciplined practitioner. Now, again, I was a 19-year-old kid and it took me 7 months to figure it out. I would think that an educated me at 30 or, maybe a little bit further along in life wouldn't have taken that long. But it's different for every person. Some people see the benefits after the first practice. They'll make that connection and feel this sense of positivity where they understand that, hey, this is very beneficial. Whereas other people, it might take them a few months to figure it out. And it's just different for everybody.
How do you feel about Wim Hof breathing? Because that is something that I've practiced. I've talked to other practitioners. They find that it helps them a lot, especially on competition day. How do you feel about that practice? Have you used it? Is it similar to what you practice? Does it have similar benefits?
I look at the root of where all these things come from instead of, when somebody, it's kind of like, I look at that like, and I'm not taking anything away from him. I think what he's done has been great. But when I see somebody like Wim Hof and I see that, I like, where did he learn from? Where did these practices come from? Because he didn't make this stuff up, right? And so all of these breathing techniques that you learn, and for me, the farthest back I can see breathing techniques coming from is from yogic practices and from Qigong practices, which are somewhere over 4,000 years old. Everything that you see labeled today basically comes from those two sources. I go to the source, where these are coming from, so I can really understand the science behind it rather than somebody's interpretation of it. Because, and this is what I teach my students, that would be like me saying, I'm going to take what I've learned from the meditative arts, the martial arts, and I'm going to create a system and call it Jeff's Martial Arts, and this is the way to do it, and for me, I don't have that ego. I want to learn from as many traditions as I can and really understand the root of the practice. And so while I think, again, what he's doing is great and he's pulled some really great resources from some of these ancient practices, however, for a practitioner, I wouldn't label anything as the source, right? I would want to investigate it further. Why am I doing these breathing practices? Is this a yin practice or a yang practice? How can this help affect my energetic performance physically, mentally, emotionally, and really understand the science behind it? And that's where you're going to start being able to write your own prescription for the practices that you want to get. And that's what I try to do with my students is how do I teach them how to understand this stuff so they really can have that evolving practice?
So being mindful of time, I know we got to cut it short pretty quickly here. I have a couple of quick questions. Don't even, they're kind of rapid fire, and just sort of answer them with short answers if you possibly can before we get out of here. First of all, do you offer like online coaching?
Yeah, I do. I have an online program at theyieldingwarrior.com. And also, if you're kind of interested in this philosophy, at theyieldingwarrior.com/book, you can get a free copy of my most recent book. Just pay for shipping and handling, and we'll send that out. If you don't want a physical copy, you can download a digital copy of it on the website, and it'll talk about some of what we're doing. Also on that website, I have a teacher training program up there. So for those of you out there who have a yoga studio or a martial arts studio, and you want to learn how to integrate a meditation program in your studio, and here at my academy, I have 4 different adult programs. My meditation only program is generating $40,000 a month. I've only got 6 classes a week that I teach, and it's something where I'm positively changing people's lives, and I can tap into a market that's not my jiu-jitsu and my boxing clientele necessarily. Some of those guys are cross-training into the meditative arts, but you can tap into people that are in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and even 80s and target a different audience. And those people have less competition being marketed to. And so you can get the leads for like a third of the cost of your Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and other leads that you're shooting for. And so it's really been hugely beneficial for the success of my academy. I have a pretty large academy here. We have about 500 active members. I have 14 employees here. So it's been around for a bit. And, that's the easiest program to grow and market to. And so for those of you that are looking for another pillar in your business, that's a great resource.
We'll include all of those links in the show notes, all of your products and everything. I remember training judo before, and at the end of every judo practice, they would do like a prayer for like 30 seconds to a minute. Do you incorporate that into your BJJ classes?
I do not.
What's the most important martial art in your life?
When we talk about external martial arts, the one I'm most passionate about is the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. However, when we talk, I kind of put that in a different category than the meditative arts. The meditative arts has been life-changing for me in so many ways. And I think one of the things that's made me so passionate about that practice is that, I've been fortunate enough to touch thousands of people's lives with that and seen some amazing stories and transformations by this. And, it's always fun with the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to take somebody out to a competition and have them do well. But when somebody comes in here and gets into the meditative arts and they're thinking about committing suicide, and I show them a positive path and changes their life, that's pretty rewarding. And that's what's made me so motivated to, really try to get this message out there.
Describe your grappling style in one word.
I'm a choke guy. I love going for the chokes. That's kind of my main theme from every position. I'm always hunting for chokes.
That was going to be sort of my next question, is what's your favorite submission? So can you elaborate on what choke you prefer?
I don't have any one specific one. I just love that game. I love that strategy and all of the angles that comes from, if you have a good, strong choke game, people are giving you arm bars, they're giving you Kimuras, they're giving you back takes, they're giving you all this other stuff because they're having such a hard time fighting your choke. And so I've always just loved that element of the game.
What's your favorite thing to do?
Other than the martial arts and the meditative arts, I love to play music, hang out with my kids, and mountain bike.
Last question. What's one thing you learned this week?
Well, I just came from a seminar, so I learned all kinds of stuff about mindset. I was at a seminar called Date with Destiny, and pretty great time.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Jeff. Is there anything else you want to talk about, or any products you want to mention before we get out of here?
No, sir. Thank you for having me. It's been great chatting.
Cool. All right. Well, I really appreciate your time. Guys, if you want to support the show, check out the links in the bottom. I'm going to go practice a little bit of meditation and look into it because I'm interested in optimizing all aspects of my life. And I hope you guys got a lot of this episode. If you want to support the show, again, links in the bottom. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.